It's time for the Roots and Roots Show with your host, Greg Rashid, bringing you history and music from the Black American diaspora. Greg and his guests' goal is to root the show's information in your psyche, providing you the roots to expand knowledge within your community. Now here's your host, Greg Rashid.
Well, I want to say Swati Cup to everyone out there, which means hello and Thai. This is Greg Rashid with another edition of the Root and Root Show. And yes, for some of you who don't know, who've never listened to the show, there's a few of you out there that haven't. I'm in Thailand, been in here for a number of years in Bangkok, Thailand. You might hear some ambient noises in the background. You might hear people selling fruit. You might hear some people building something. Because a lot of my listeners like to hear the background noises. But I have so many people that listen all over the world besides Thailand. People listen. I want to say hi to the folks that are listening now in Brazil. Got some new folks in Brazil and all over the world. In India, I got to say hi to my regular folks listening in India. But a lot of people listen every Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. Mountain Time on KUHSdenver.com, created by the one and only, the original Dr. Duncan Stein himself, Henry Archuleta. And I want to say hi to all my friends in the Colorado region. I hope to get back there at some point. But in the meantime, I'm here in Bangkok, loving it. It's 100. It was 101 degrees here today, but I love it. I love the heat. But I am so happy to have on my program today someone I interviewed. I can't believe it's been 10 years. It seems like I interviewed her just like last month, talking about her great book on the heavyweight, first black heavyweight champion, Jack Johnson, Rebel Sojourner. But we're talking about a new book of hers, an excellent book, and it's on Bold Type Press, and it's called Blackball, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Spencer Haywood, and the Generation That Saved the Soul of the NBA. And I'm talking about Professor Teresa Runstetler. She's a professor at American University, and her major thesis, a major concentration, I would say, is African American history, sports, a little bit of everything, but African American history. And I'm just so happy to have Teresa on today. Are you there, Teresa?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And my ambient noise might be sirens because
Hey,
I'm coming to you from Baltimore City.
hey, I love, I used to go to Baltimore a whole lot, and I love those sounds in Baltimore. I didn't want to be a part of those sounds. I didn't want the cops to come after me, but I I remember them very well. But this book here, as I said off the air to you, I really love this book as I love the Jack Johnson book, and it is just so fascinating because you're talking about the era. And my only thing about this book, as far as the title, I know you have the soul, and I know you didn't create the title, the soul that to save the soul of the NBA. I would just put it here, the generation that brought soul to the NBA, because that's what it
Right.
was. And that is my era, the 70s. I was growing up then, and I went to a number of games and something in DC, because that's where I'm from, Washington, DC. The Summer League, during the summer, they would have the Summer Leagues where a lot of the players would play for free, and you could see them free in what they called the Urban Coalition Leagues. And you would see people like Dr. J, Julius Irving, so some of you who may not know the name, Moses Malone, uh, people like World Be Free when it's known as Lloyd Free. Just so many folks would come to town and just play for free. They would play for free, and these games were like pure street ball. It was black ball at its finest. So this book brought back so many memories. Just reading this. But tell folks because the black ball, it has a double meaning, and I want you to tell my listeners what you mean by black ball, because it's more than just a play.
So when I was writing Blackball, I was thinking about how African American players transformed professional basketball from the late 60s into the early 80s, before the days of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. That's typically when we start thinking about NBA history, or we go back to the days of Bill Russell. But I really wanted to think about that critical moment when black basketball became blacker, both stylistically and then also in terms of the number of Black players in the league. But on the flip side of that, it's also about blackballing, the blackballing or blacklisting of players and backlash against black players for taking a stand about their working conditions, about their
Yes.
contracts, their ability to move from team to team, things that were not a given back in the days of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Spencer Haywood.
And I mean, you do a great job with this book. And on the cover of the book is a picture of Spencer Haywood. And for some of my listeners who are younger, who don't know Spencer Haywood, especially in Denver, Spencer Haywood he would be the equivalent right now, I would say, of LeBron James as far as how he played. You know, he could play any position. He was 6'9". He was known for, I mean, he did, me and my buddies used to love seeing what he would do, the helicopter dunk, where he would just
Mm-hmm.
wave the ball in the air like it was a helicopter and dunk it. But he could play any position, and he was legendary. But he was legendary not so much because of his play, because he's a great player, but what he did to change everything, salaries, you name it, freedom in the NBA, and also I could say too, in just all professional sports in general. So Teresa, let's talk a little bit about what he did at during that time, and being such a young guy because he was only 20 when he really did all this, and what happened to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Spencer Haywood is one of those players who, if you're a hoop head, you know who he is. If you've been following, his sort of reemergence into the public eye, you might know who he is. But on the other hand, a hidden figure in NBA history. He actually was responsible for taking down the NBA's 4-year rule. The NBA at that time in the early 70s had a rule whereby uh, they required that any player entering the draft had to be 4 years beyond their high school graduation. Now, this seems pretty innocent, and it was, uh, I guess, cast as a way to help keep young guys in college so that they would get their degrees and then they could enter the draft. But in reality, it was a gentleman's agreement between two monopolies, the NBA and the NCAA, whereby the NBA said, we won't touch your underclassmen as long as you maintain that free farm system for us, keep developing our talent. We don't have to pay for it. And then they will come in through the draft. And through the draft process, we can keep rookie salaries from exploding. We can suppress their wages. So Spencer Haywood basically blew up that system with the help of the ABA, which was the rival league of the NBA back in from 1967 to 1976. It was in existence, called the American Basketball Association,
Right.
in order to undercut the ability of the NBA to get quote unquote fresh talent from the college ranks. They instituted something called the hardship clause. And Spencer Haywood was the first player to enter the ABA under this hardship clause. And again, they pitched it as this kind of humanitarian thing where they were going to help young men who were not financially stable, who had urgent financial need to come into the league, even as underclassmen, and to skip ahead and bypass the 4-year rule. So Spencer Haywood became a member of the Denver Rockets, and he was a star player. He proved his worth on the court, but he found out pretty quickly that the massive contract that he supposedly had with Denver was actually more so smoke and mirrors. He
Right.
thought that he was earning a certain amount of money, but when you actually broke it down and you looked at it, so much of that money was deferred compensation and it was unguaranteed. So if the Denver Rockets or the ABA went belly up, he'd be left with nothing.
And
They
and
also had, yeah, they had this clause in there that he would have to work with them an extra number of years beyond his playing time in order to recoup his money. Um, so again, it was just all smoke and mirrors. He ended up bringing an agent into the room to try and negotiate with the Ringsbys, who were the owners of the Denver Rockets. They basically stonewalled him. He refused to play for them. They sued him. He countersued them. And then he ended up, on the advice of his agent, signing with the NBA's new expansion team, the Seattle Supersonics. But wouldn't you know it, the NBA said he is not allowed to play in the NBA because he's violating. So he sued the NBA and ended up taking down that 4-year rule. And you mentioned LeBron. I mean, LeBron would not be LeBron without
no,
Spencer Haywood taking a stand and saying this is actually a monopolistic business practice that is meant to uphold your control over player movement. And so he's so key in really starting to crack through the autocratic power of the professional leagues.
definitely. And he is in the book. You mentioned when he's in the hotel, he overhears the owners talking about it, and you kind of you clean up a little bit of what they actually say about him, but talk about that because that's a key thing. Because they're smiling in his face during the meeting, but after the meeting, is a whole different thing.
Well, and smiling to his face in the meeting, smiling in front of the press, and basically saying, look, we've offered him a great contract. We care about our players. But in reality, behind closed doors, calling him the N word, basically saying that this guy doesn't, we can't negotiate with him like a white man. He just doesn't know what he's doing. He's being controlled by his agent. So, all of these narratives about white paternalism on behalf of the team owners, thinking that they should be able to control Black players, and they wanted them to be isolated. They wanted them to not have access to any legal representation. And Spencer Haywood was somebody who actually sought out an agent
Yeah.
and, really tried to negotiate with them on more of an even playing field. And that was unusual in the early 1970s.
in in
Not
any sport,
everybody
like you
had an
said, any
agent or a
sport.
lawyer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
any sport. And the thing is, as you know, and a lot of my listeners know, I lived in Denver for 20 years. And I ended up covering sports for 10 of those years, and that included covering the Denver Nuggets that were the former Rockets. And Teresa, there is nothing at the arena there. When I was there, it was the Pepsi Center. It has another name now. That honors or recognizes Spencer Haywood. There's nothing. His number's not in the rafters, nothing. And he was the MVP his 1 year there, 1.5 years there. He was the MVP. He was the best player in the league. And he is not, from what I remember, it may have changed since I left there, but he's not recognized. And I checked online as I was reading the book to see if there was any recognition of Spencer by the Denver Nuggets, and there's none. In fact, they recognize a player named Byron Beck, who I don't even know a lot of people even know who he was, but he was like basically a defensive player, but he wasn't that good. He's not a Hall of Famer, but his name is up in the rafters
Hmm.
as a retired number, but not Spencer Haywood. And I just thought that, and it never occurred to me until I read your book. I said, wow, Spencer is not recognized by this. It's not been recognized. And I think that's part of the blackballing of him and some other players we'll talk about briefly about, they have been blackballed by and still are blackballed by the NBA. And as I read your
Yeah.
book, it hit me that things, even though you see people like LeBron, who have power, who can come out and say certain things about police brutality and talk about racism. The paternalism still exists. And it creeps up. It doesn't even creep up. You see it. You can even see it right now. How, and I hate to, go against my Nuggets who are in the Western Finals against LeBron's Lakers. But the fact is, I'm noticing how, and I like Jokic, they call him the Joker with the Nuggets, but he is getting a lot more press than you would think. All of a sudden, a lot of I have to say, the white media are discovering him and they're really pushing him. And I've heard people saying he's one of the greatest players ever. It's like, no, not. He's one of the best players in the league now, but it's again the whole thing about, he's a white ball player in this black league, so we're really going to promote him more. And do you see that? Do still see that in the NBA?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also too, I would even add players who are Black but not American,
Yeah,
right? So there's a kind of uh, currency to being white in this essentially Black American sport, but also to being foreign without the baggage of the history of African
ah,
Americans in the United States in the sport, right?
that's
So somebody from the outside can come in, and I'm thinking, from an earlier generation, I'm thinking of like Tony Parker coming in from
right.
France, right? He's Black, but he represents a different form of Blackness that is perhaps more palatable to a white audience. And I will say this, a lot of this has to do with the fact that you still have a white dominated sports media
Right.
that likes to pick apart the lives of and find ways to demonize African American players. That's across all of the professional sports leagues.
It definitely is. And being in the press box for many years at the Pepsi Center, at Coors Field, at Mile High, and other places, I would hear things from these white reporters when they would think you weren't listening. And I hate to say it, but there were a lot of good white reporters, but there were some who didn't mean well, and it came out in some of their writing in their columns where they would criticize black players. In particular, when Carmelo Anthony was with the Nuggets, he got a lot of criticism for things that a white athlete they would just let go, but they just like attacked him constantly, and to the point that he wanted to leave the city, which he ended up getting traded. But it was, but I would hear stuff, and it was like basically a lot of these reporters are jealous. Some of them are not were never athletes or never even, rode a tricycle or anything. And they, and they are, and I would hear this, they were jealous of black athletes making money, making that money, getting that
Well,
fame.
also making that money, but then not being just grateful or submissive as
That's
they
right.
win that or
That's the other thing.
earn that money. And I mean, that was part of the problem with somebody like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar back in the early
Yeah.
70s. He comes in off of the heels of the revolt of the Black athlete, which was essentially a movement of Black athletes in the late 60s where there were protests and boycotts of competitions, and all as a critique of racism in the sports industry, both amateur and professional. Um, and he comes into the league telling people that this is how he is, and
Right.
this is, come to me with your best and final offer for that first contract. Here is how you will now address me. Here is my new Muslim name. He if he didn't think the question was very insightful, he might grunt when he was giving you an answer. And so he didn't play those typical scripts
No,
that reporters were expecting of him, and he became demonized for it.
definitely.
So you
Oh,
can definitely draw a line to the present day with some of that as well.
I mean, now he is revered now and looked up to. You know, it's kind of like when I look at Kareem, I think of they're both Muslims, Muhammad Ali, how he's revered now, how he was revered. But at that time, when they're coming out, 1970, in the 70s, there were a lot of folks that couldn't stand Kareem. A lot of people, a lot of reporters. And I have to say too, there were some black folks who didn't like Kareem because he was Muslim, because he wasn't in
Right.
their, image humble, like you're saying. He wasn't what they thought would be
Hmm.
humble and all that. And there was a lot of that. And you bring it out in your book, and I'm glad you talk about Kareem and all that, because that's something that a lot of folks forget or don't realize. And also something else you bring out in the book, I had forgotten about. But you mentioned that you did a lot of homework in this book, because you bring up a couple of publications. There was a publication, I'm growing up, I'm trying to learn, understand what's going on in the sports and all. And briefly, I was reading this thing called Basketball Weekly, this little newspaper that used to come out, I think it came out every other, no, it came out weekly. But it was what I picked up on quickly, and I'm in junior high school, how they would talk about black athletes, basketball players, as far as, oh, this guy's a troublemaker, he's a militant, he's this and that. Where they would mention someone like a Rick Barry or John Havlicek, oh, family man, all this. And I just hate,
Right, right.
and I had to stop getting that publication. And then you mentioned another publication that a lot of people may not know about, Black Sports. And that is a forgotten publication. If you can find that on eBay, it's amazing, because I've looked on there, and it called, you have to pay a lot of money to get that. And talk about that publication, as well as the role that people like Sam Lacey played, as far as making people
Hmm.
understand how these athletes, how black athletes really were, and what was going on with these white paternalistic owners.
Yeah, I mean, Basketball Weekly, that magazine, when I started reading it, I was just like, wow, this is
Oh,
surprisingly conservative. I know when I first started out doing the research, everybody who I talked to would say to me, "Oh, but the NBA is so progressive." And I was like, "Okay, in comparison to maybe the NFL." But let's
right.
interrogate that a little bit. So, I think that Black Sports, which was a Black owned, Black controlled sports magazine that was trying to be the equivalent of Sports Illustrated, but explicitly for a Black audience, covering Black athletes. From 1971 to 1978, it was in existence. I mean, this magazine, it had everything from cars to
Oh man,
fashion. It was like a men's magazine
it
for the
was
most
bad.
part, even though it did have women readers. I mean, if you get a chance to look at it, it's glossy. It's got
Oh, it was great.
fantastic photography from that time. But we think now in terms of athletes being able to get their message out over social media and all of these other ways. They have podcasts now. They have all sorts of ways of reaching their fans directly, unmediated through traditional media. That did not exist in the same way in the 1970s. So, what folks like Oscar Robertson or Spencer Haywood or other players who were battling against the power of the team owners, where they went was to Black media.
Yeah.
So Black Sports, to reporters like Lacey, to newspapers like the Baltimore Afro-American that were invested in telling the stories of Black athletes with an eye to, understanding the history of not just Black athletes, but also the contemporary conditions of Black America and really contextualizing what these fights were about. Oscar Robertson and a couple of other players and coaches had this interview, they called it the rap session,
Oh yeah.
with Black Sports about the reserve clause. And he explained that, look, this is a case where the NBA is acting like a monopoly. They are violating the Sherman Antitrust Act because they are not allowing us to shop our talents in a free market. So this is a restraint of trade. And he also, explained to a wider public that this was an issue that meant particular things to Black athletes because the reserve clause, which tied you to one team for the entirety of your career, and they could dispense with you when they wanted to, but they also essentially owned your contract even after it expired. That was tantamount to a form of economic bondage.
Right.
And so if you are a Black person in America, you know what different forms of economic bondage have looked like. And so they couldn't help but also bring a kind of racial and labor analysis to their situation as athletes. And they were very forthright about that in particularly in the Black press at that time. But, it wasn't like white newspapers were calling them for commentary. They typically became mainstream sports
Yeah,
publications.
it was. I mean,
Never bothered to really ask the players their perspective.
no, they never would. And like we were talking about Basketball Weekly, there was another book I would get every year was the Complete Guide to Pro Basketball by Xander Hollander. I don't know if you know that name, but he would always talk about the players, and he would talk about Black players, only their salaries, and talk about
Mm.
how lazy or they weren't putting out. But when it came to a white player, he would talk about again family matters, what college they went to, what their degree was, and all of that. And I quickly picked up as a teenager, like, this is silly, this is racist. Why am I buying this book? But
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
all of that. I would have to go to something like Black Sports or the Afro American in DC to find out what these athletes are really talking about, or see them during a summer league game or something where they could openly talk to the fans and all that. And that's something a lot of folks, like you're saying, like no social media back then, obviously nothing like that. And but even with social media today, as you kind of mentioned, this whole paternalism, the whole racism is still there. It still creeps in. And I wouldn't say
Well, I
creeps in.
think yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think that the NBA is very careful. So they recognize now that having a certain degree of consciousness of, what their players are saying, Black Lives Matter, etc., is actually good business for them.
Right.
It actually helps them with their increasingly diverse and progressive fan base. And, it also, I think, is necessary for them to bow a little bit in favor of the players because the players have a lot more power now, both individually as brands, but also collectively as part of the NBPA, which is their players association, their union. So I think if the NBA is allowing certain political expressions to happen on the court in negotiation with the players, it's because the players have a certain degree of power.
Right.
But on the other hand, I think you're absolutely right in the sense that they always want to monitor everything, and they always want to make sure that politics is within certain boundaries, that it's curated, that it's not too militant. So there's always this sort of, I think, balance that the NBA is trying to maintain, um, with, just how much Black politics they're going to
Right.
allow onto the court.
Well, and it's
Right.
something that
And I mean, they don't want somebody like John Morant, you know,
no, no, they
showing his weapon around.
no, they don't want
Right.
that.
That is like that is a public relations nightmare for the league.
No, they definitely
In
don't.
the same way that the question of violence or drugs was a public relations nightmare for the league back in the 70s and early 80s. So you can see how they've quickly rushed in to try and do damage control on that situation. And of course, I'm not, for, you know, just having guns randomly around, but it's interesting to see the reaction, um, just how quick that reaction has been. And I'm sure that they're having so many conversations behind the scenes about how to manage that
Right.
image.
And how they manage, as you said in the book, and I wish we could get into that even more, the whole quote cocaine era, that whole thing, because you do a great job talking about that. And this one sports writer who really, his one little article led to this whole, pandemic as far as an NBA, as far as all these players must be on cocaine, all of, this ridiculous stuff based on this one white writer writing this one little article. And you really get into detail in that. And I urge my listeners to really get this book, Black Ball, by Teresa Runstettler. It's a great book on Bone Type Press. But I want to, before we conclude, I could go on with you all day about the book because I love it. But one thing you say, and I talked to you off air about this, but what some people don't know, she's professor at American University in DC, and but also her other life, she was a dancer with the Toronto Raptors. And you mentioned, and I said to you, I hope you put a book out about this. Talk about the change you noticed when you were a dancer and when you were getting ready to leave after being there, I guess, a couple of years, and what the NBA was trying to do to cater to a different type of audience.
So back in and here now I'm going to be giving you my age, right? Back in the late 90s, I joined the team the second year that it was in existence. So the 96, 97 season, and then I stayed with them for two more seasons after that. But in the early days, the Toronto Raptors were kind of like a scrappy startup. And, there was a lot more leeway, especially with the dance team. We had a wonderful leader in Tamara Mose, who was our original choreographer of the Toronto Raptors dance pack, who incidentally is now a professor at Brooklyn College in sociology.
Wow.
But she was really insistent on having a team that reflected what Toronto looked like, the diversity of Toronto, the kind of youth culture, the
Right.
music, etc. So when we started out, we had mechanic suits and boots and bandanas, and there was nothing really super, you know, tiny and sparkly. And we danced to what were the top hip hop hits at that time, not just the ones that would be acceptable to play at your family's wedding, but the
Right.
stuff that you really wanted to listen to in the club. And that's what we were dancing to. But as the team became much more corporatized and was bought out by Maple Leaf Sport and Entertainment, which also owns at the time owned the Toronto Maple Leafs, which was, hockey is everything, of course, in Ontario, Canada, and especially in Toronto. It became very clear especially when we moved into the new arena, the fancy new arena where they were selling seat licenses and corporate boxes and whatnot, that they really wanted to make sure that we were, cleaned up a little bit, and wow, that we were catering to, you know, more so white fan base than representing, youth culture in Toronto. And I saw the change in the costumes. I saw the change in the music. Nothing against Will Smith town, but
Well, I know.
when you're 20 years old, you don't necessarily want to be just dancing to yet another, you know, song that you're not really into,
Yeah,
or that's not hitting with you. So I saw that transformation in real time, and kind of like what you were saying about, being a young person reading Basketball Weekly and other publications of the time, you kind of know that something's off, but I didn't
yeah,
necessarily have the full analysis of the situation. So when I started doing the research for the book, and even in the years before doing this book, reflecting back on that time, I was like, whoa, yeah, there was something going on there. And this was all tied up in a kind of performance that was acceptable to
yeah.
their imagined more valuable fans, the
Wow,
the the white men who, had the majority of the seats that were closer to the floor. So,
amazing.
to me, that just spoke to the relationship between the dancers and our part in that spectacle, and the players and their part in, creating this kind of spectacle of entertainment for the imagined white fan, which I think still
Yeah,
still exists today in terms of how games are put on, and how they're managed.
it definitely does. And Teresa, I could talk to you all day about this book. I got to get you back on. I can't wait another 10 years with you and get you back on here
I'll
again.
try to be faster.
Okay, okay. But what do you want listeners to get out of the book? One, if you could sum it up in like just an elevator speech in one sentence or two sentences, what do you want them to get out of this?
I want them to understand that the NBA is what it is today because Black players made it that way. And they made it that way in terms of its more progressive labor politics, in terms of its style. Um, they made it that way through struggle. Nothing was granted or given without a real fight on their part. I think the second thing that I would say is that athletes are regular human beings. And
That's right.
part of what I was trying to do in the book was to really show not just those moments on the floor, but all of the shenanigans that go on, behind closed doors, and their own struggles in their own personal lives. And that we should really, when we're covering athletes, think about the whole person and not just them as these, objects of scrutiny.
That's something I've always told folks that these are just human beings who they're gifted, but they're all, human beings and they work. It is work what they're doing. It's not play. They work very hard to get to where they are. And that's what people have to understand. But I'm just so happy to have you on again. There's so many folks so many memories you brought back with this book, because there are some people I wanted to talk about, can't talk about on this show today, but, Wally Jones, Warren Jabelli, just people who meant a lot to me when I was growing up. And I'm just, besides Spencer Haywood and the well-known names, but thank you so much, Teresa. And if anyone wants to reach you, how can they reach
I'm on Instagram at sporty.prof. I'm also on Twitter, Dr. T. Runstedler.
Dr. T. I didn't know that. That's right. It is Dr. T. That's right. And this book is
Or
a
you can
slam.
just try and Google me. You'll find me somewhere.
Yeah. And this book is a slam dunk, just like Dr. J. Dr. T has written a great book. Black Ball, go get it. It's an excellent book. But take care, Teresa. I will be talking to you later. Thank you so much for stopping by here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was such a fun conversation.
Thank you. You take care. Oh, I really enjoyed talking to Teresa today, and I hope it's not another 10 years that we will talk again. And please get that book, Black Ball. Her name again is, if you're just tuning in, Teresa Renstedler, and it's on Bold Type Books. But we're going to change up a little bit right now because, and this name comes up in the book, by the way, but I'm taping the show today, which is May 19th over here in Bangkok. And this is the anniversary of the birth of the one and only, the great El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, a lot of you know as Malcolm X. I'm going to play the song from 69. This is, I'm going to do this one right now. This is Malcolm's Gone. And it has on here Leon Thomas, lead vocals, along with Rashawn Kirk. Pharoah Sanders is on this one on saxophone. Let's hear this right now. Malcolm's Gone on the Root and Root Show.
El-Hajj Malik Shabazz. But he's not forgotten. I know he died just to set men free. Yes, Malcolm's gone, but he's not forgotten. He died to save me, gave me my dignity. just to set me free. Yes, Malcolm's gone, but he's not forgotten. He died to save me. Gave me my dignity.
And there was Leon Thomas on vocals, along with the great Pharoah Sanders on saxophone, among others, on that song. And that was Malcolm's Gone from 1969 on the Root and Root Show, as we honor the life of Malcolm X with this song. And we're going to switch gears a little bit now, because every show I always end with a song by Wynonie Harris, because I got a petition out there. You can go on Facebook and look for Put Wynonie Harris in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And you can also go on change.org and look for Put Wynonie Harris in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Trying to get him in there. Amazing performer. As I always say, if you look at Elvis, that's basically looking at Wynonie Harris. He took a lot of stuff from Wynonie. But I'm going to play right now Destination Love. So let's hear that on the Root and Root Show.
Quart of oil, a gallon of gas, baby, I sure do hope it lasts. Destination love, if I get stuck, give me a shove. Destination love, I can't wait to see her smile, only got about 10 more miles. Destination love, if I get stuck, give me a shove. Destination love, well, I passed the truck, passed the bus, I must be doing fine. I'm so close I can almost feel her sweet lips on mine. If the front top blows, I got a spare. If that one goes, I'll still get there. Destination love, if I get stuck, give me a shove. Destination love. Steamed up twice. If this old car goes one more mile, I'll be in paradise. She'll be waiting there, I know. Left turn, right turn, here I go. Destination love, if I get stuck, give me a shove. Destination love.
Wynonie Harris, side 2, cut 2. Snatching apples from another man's tree.
Now poor old Uncle Ned is buried out there beneath the willow tree. A husband caught him making love to his old lady, shot him in a fit of jealousy. Married women, stay married. Don't come messing around with me. There's too many men in the graveyard from snatching apples from another man's tree. Once I had a sweetheart, pretty as she could be, and I didn't know she was married till her husband took her, shot at me. Shotgun boogie! Married women, stay married. Don't come messing around with me. There's too many men in the graveyard from snatching apples from another man's tree.
All right, the one and only Wynonie Harris, and that was Married Women Stay Married. And before that, we did Destination Love. And again, please go to the Facebook site, put Wynonie Harris in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, sign the petition on there, or go to change.org and sign the petition there. Put Wynonie Harris in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's overdue. You know, so many people, when they saw the petition, they said, he's not in there? Even I, when I was doing some research on something different, I just happened to come across that. I said, Wynonie Harris is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? That's amazing. But there's so many folks that should be in there, pioneers that aren't in there, but that's a whole different story. And we talk about it numerous times on the show, and we will continue to. But anyway, I just am happy today to do another show, and happy to have Teresa Runstedler on the show again to talk about her new book, Black Ball, on Bold Type Press. Please check it out. It's about the NBA. If you're a big NBA fan and you enjoy the NBA, just think about the pioneers who really made the NBA what it is now as far as free agency, in the reserve clause, the style of play that you see. It's all about those pioneers like Spencer Haywood, Oscar Robertson, so many folks, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, so many folks, Connie Hawkins, who we didn't get to today, who did so much to make the NBA what it is today. But check that book out, Black Ball. But we're going to get out of here right now. And I just want to thank everyone who listened in today. Go in love and go in peace. Help someone along the way. And remember to love yourself. Look in that mirror every morning when you get up and say, I love myself. Because if you don't love yourself, you can't do anything. You can't help anyone. If you can't help yourself, you can't love yourself, how are you going to do anything? So love yourself first thing in the morning. Say a little prayer, meditate, whatever you can, and start your day off right. Help someone in need. Help someone in your community, your prefecture, your condo, wherever you may be, especially a senior and a young person, because we're all in this together. Pandemic is technically over, but there's so many issues that are going on that need help, and people in your community. You never know who's in your community who needs some help. Your next door neighbor who you may think is doing well may have a problem. Well, find out. Find out if they need your assistance in some way. Especially a senior or a young person. But again, this is Greg Rashid with the Root and Root Show. We'll see you next time. You take care, and you can check me out on Facebook at Gregory Rashid. That's Rasheed. And I always respond to all my listeners. Love to hear from you. Love to hear suggestions for future guests and songs on the show. But go in love and go in peace. We'll next time on the Rootin' Roots Show.
Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. And remember, spread the knowledge, share the power.